Good morning. I'm going to talk about arrows today. And I guess we could say this is a series I will start on arrow making, my arrow making. There's lots of different ways to make arrows. I don't want to say there's one right way to make arrows. I think it's super important if you're going to try to shoot at a living animal that you make arrows that perform a certain way. And so what I want you to get from this, little series I'm doing is it's more important to learn what makes a good arrow and how to build one than as opposed to one right way. There's a lot of different species of arrows, woods you can use for arrows. There's different styles of shooting. Every arrow is going to shoot differently out of a bow and a different shooter. Some bows are shooting very off-center shot. Some people shoot differently, have different draws, different shooting styles. I'm not here to say there's one right way. You're going to see where I am with my arrow making progression, where I am right now. There's a lot of fantastic archers out there that can make, wonderful equipment that shoots and performs well. And that's the key. You need your equipment to perform well. And I think that's done by learning how to make a good arrow, and that's done through time and through experimenting and knowing what makes a good arrow fly well. So here's a couple different examples of arrows. This is a cane shaft. This was gifted me. Cane is definitely set up more for compound arrow making. I'm going to talk about two different styles of arrow making. Compound arrows, which I don't know if I brought any out with me, but this is a broken example of a compound arrow. See the knock smacked on the ground, broke the knock off, snapped my foreshaft off on this one. Compound arrow, all that means is it has a couple different parts that make up the arrow. Typically a foreshaft that you insert into the arrow. So it's compound. There's more than one moving part. As opposed to, I primarily shoot. I enjoy making just a regular hardwood shaft arrow that I insert the tip directly into or over the bear shaft. Several different woods in here. There's several different fantastic bow woods. I'm trying a new one this year. I've had this sitting around for years and just getting around to making them. This was gifted me. This comes from the West Coast. Ocean spray. Very dense wood. An arrow wood that I've been shooting for years since I started learning how to make arrows is honeysuckle bush. Not very historically accurate, but I think they make fantastic arrows. Super dependable. I can pretty much pick them a certain way, certain size, let them season, and I know they're going to make a dependable, almost indestructible arrow. So I like that consistency. Another example of cane. Different coloration, but fantastic, lightweight, rigid arrow material. Such a good arrow wood. A lot of the good hardwoods make excellent arrows. It's important to learn what makes a good arrow, and I describe it as the arrow's recovery or snap. There's a lot of crossover for me personally between arrow making and bow making. A lot of the same rules apply when I'm looking for a good bow wood. It has to be strong, dependable, have a good snap, and it's the same way when I'm making an arrow. It has to have a really good snap to it and recovery, and that's what here's a really excellent example of a arrow wood. This is hazel. I think specifically this is witch hazel, honestly, but super snappy, super strong wood. Make a bow out of this stuff. That snap or that recovery, as I describe it, is super important. It makes the arrow fly really well and recover faster from the paradox, which translates into a flatter, straighter flying arrow at impact and more energy transmission and delivering the full effect of that arrow as opposed to trying to recover and hitting goofy. You want an arrow to be flying straight and flat when it hits the target. So a lot of the good hardwoods are good at that. Ash, birch, Birch is nice, but it's hard to get a sapling this size that's not all, has a kink at every little branch. So something like that, a lot of times you have to harvest a log almost, split it into dowels and make something like that. But all those good hardwoods make excellent arrows. Here's an arrow. I might talk about these at some point. This is something I never heard of being used as arrows, but it's a cousin to, historically, and what I know a lot of shooters use, wild rose. Piece of wild rose. It's harder for me to find these that spine out for my shooting style. A lot of times they're a little weaker, but you can adjust that too by arrow length and stuff. But these are set up for more for a compound arrow. They're thin wall, but have a big hollow tubular, more of a tubular arrow. The pith, more set up for a compound arrow. This is its cousin or brother, or however you want to look at it, relative of wild rose. And this is blackberry or bramble. Like I said, I can't find any real information on these. I'm sure they were used because I use them. I mean, that's not saying a lot, but I think they make a really good arrow. This is a really heavy spine on this one. I wanted to see how far you could push these. And I shot this out of an 85, 90 pound draw bow. And it's probably why I snapped the foreshot. But they make a good arrow. They're very pronounced ridges. Pre-made, pre-built in blood grooves, stiffeners. You can see hopefully you can see the very pronounced ridges. That darker area is a valley. That shiny area is a ridge. Very pronounced. There's maybe a good example. Looks like I almost carved those in there. That's naturally how they occur. I've never, I made this arrow probably four years ago. It's probably a little twisted now, but it's not bad. You can shoot that thing, it's still really straight. They seem to stay pretty straight. So, promise you I'll get to maybe making an arrow here. No, I will. Maybe I'll call this my introduction to arrow making. Here's a piece of honeysuckle Knock's already cut in. Early on I set certain parameters I wanted to follow when it came to making or reproduction or just my whole primitive earth skill living mindset. Certain parameters. I learned how to make bows and arrows like I guess everybody else, using steel tools and reading and watching some of the real authorities on this type of equipment. And quickly I transitioned into kind of what I enjoy, and that's Paleolithic technology, stone tools. So that's what I really enjoy, and that's how I do it. But I set those parameters for a reason. I still consider myself a greenhorn, but I came into primitive archery with no archery background. Never made a bow before. I started researching and building wooden bows and arrows, and so I developed a certain shooting style through time and trial and error. Certain way of making my arrows, certain way of spining them according to my arrows. Never used spine testers. Never did any of that. I wanted this to remain kind of pure. And how a greenhorn back in the day learning how to make arrows and equipment would have learned through trial and making dozens and dozens and dozens of arrows and really tapping into an intuitive sense of how an arrow should flex, giving a certain bow in the draw and how off-center, and observing how the arrow's flying when it hits the target. I'd say, we refer to this as instinctive archery, but I think a lot of the instinct is also too, and is that intuitive sense of how this stuff is performing for us, and observation and learning and seeing how it's performing and really tapping into that. I can't tell you these are going to shoot perfect, but I feel like this is the right flex for my bows, how I shoot them and where it needs to be. I've never spined them, but maybe it'll be close, maybe it'll be too stiff. I mean, I'm shooting really far off center, so you'd, in a traditional sense, want a weaker spine for something like that, but I don't know how these spine out. But I feel like that's the right flex for my bows, and I don't know until I flesh them and shoot them, and then I can fine-tune them from there. But I can usually get an arrow that more or less goes where I'm pointing it. you know, half the time. If I'm practiced up. Alright, let's get started.